What's a bit of your background? What's going on?
Well, I am a science documentary maker. So for 20, maybe more years, I've been churning out sort of blue chip, factual, high-end documentaries, mainly on science, history, biology, and so my perspective has always been, whatever the subject, to drill down into the factual evidence. I mean, I worked for BBC Horizon, and that was where I first sort of came across the whole sort of, as it was then called, transsexual movement, but of course there's now the LGBTQ and the transgender movement.
And I want to get going first. There's a lot of stuff. There's some stuff we talked about before that I'm amazed and shocked by. But we'll get onto them. But I want to start with a bit of a celebrity angle because this is showbiz. Have you been following what's been going on with celebrities endorsing their teenagers? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I wrote a piece that compared the likes of David Tennant and Georgia Tennant, his wife, to the whole sort of mommy dearest sort of phenomenon.
What's
you
that?
know, mommy dearest, the camp classic. It's so camp, it's bad. It's the movie in which God, what's her name? The star that is taking the piss out of, big Hollywood star in the 50s, and the movie is effectively sort of saying that she was a monster.
Right.
But she was the star who went out there with the perfect family and the beautiful kids. She'd adopted them, and it was part of her branding, and it made her sort of seem like so wholesome. Behind the scenes, the movie said that she was an absolute horror and had beaten her kids. I'm not suggesting that any of the celebrities today beat their kids, but it's the same sort of exploitation of young people. And it's also, I mean, it's part of that whole phenomenon of not just their kids, but celebrities lecturing us on social justice is a bad enough problem. When they then pull in their children, it's a way, I think the problem with celebrity actors in particular, the problem is that they spend their entire lives reading other people's scripts. So they never get to say anything that's authentically them. And then, of course, that's why they suddenly come up with, some cause, whether it's the environment or gay rights or whatever, that they can then pin their name to as a sort of authentic, real statement about what I really believe. But most of them are as dumb as can be. I mean, they're charismatic looking and they can act really well, but that doesn't mean to say they know anything. Brian Cox is a fantastic actor, but he believes in Scottish independence and I've never heard him say a single sensible thing about why Scotland would take the risk of being independent. So there's no reason why, because somebody's a great actor, we should listen to them on politics or social justice or civil rights.
It's actually a really good point, and it's something that winds me up. I've been thinking about a lot recently. If an alien came down and they were like, what's a bit weird about this society or Western society, the extent to which we revere actors, as good as they are. I mean, if nobody was saying anything, I'd say, oh, no, they're pretty good. But they are like the biggest, apart from sports stars as well. And sports stars actually really do have to work at something. Actors are just sort of pretending to be someone. I know some people will be offended who are watching who want to be sort of theatre actors and stuff. And I'm not suggesting it's not. I mean, it clearly is a talent. But is it any more of a talent than, writing the movies to me is more of a talent.
I do. I mean, I've met only very few truly famous actors, and whether it's because they are revered or just because there is something there, they can silence a room. And they do have genuine charisma, that old sort of religious sort of idea. And I think that's part of it, because everyone who works around them is telling them that they're amazing and they're gorgeous and everything. And I think it gives them the confidence or convinces them that they have something spectacular to say about the world, but they don't. They just look fantastic and they have charisma.
I think it was Louis C.K. maybe. Someone was saying that they're an empty coffee cup and you pour a script into them. And that's it. You have to have a lot of stupid people. And then some of them talk it up, don't they? Oh, I'm a method actor. And then you get some who are a bit more honest, maybe a bit more British about it, if I can say. You get I think Colin Firth has said a few times, Anthony Hopkins has said a few times, it's a job. I go in, I pretend to be someone else, I go home. It's not that hard,
Yeah.
you know. And I respect that a lot more.
When you look at the. I mean, why should we think this generation of actors is any smarter or more sorted, given their social justice views, than the last generation? Marlon Brando was the big, spokesperson for Native American rights and all that. His family was a total disaster. One of them murdered the husband or boyfriend of his sister is now in jail. There were heroin addicts all over the place. All his Native American stuff turned out to be rubbish. The woman who came to collect the Oscar turned out to be a complete fraud. She was Italian. She wasn't Native American.
I didn't know that.
The whole thing was bunkum. So if it was bunkum, then how do we think that Jamie Lee Curtis is somehow, tapping into authenticity because she's got now let me get this right. It's a boy who thinks he's a girl, isn't it? In her case, and she had a cosplay wedding for her son and everything, and you just think, are you? And she has interviewed, Dylan Mulvaney or Alok, that crazy.
I know Dylan Mulvaney.
Dylan Mulvaney's bad enough, but there's Alok, who's the non-binary hairy guy that wears dresses and makeup and is just awful. I said some terrible things about child safeguarding, which is going to be my code word for you know what. And she interviewed him and talked to him as if he was.
I should say, because we had this discussion before, you're talking about PDF files, as I call them, right? The child safeguarding. This person said a horrible thing about those people in parks who hang around and look at young people. You're not allowed to say the word on YouTube, but go on.
Exactly. So he said some appalling things, not to her, but in the past. That didn't mean to say that she didn't sit down with him, interview him, and talk to him as if he was, the new Martin Luther King. And so Jamie Lee Curtis is a fool.
Yeah.
And so why should I listen to her when she starts? She's one of these celebrities who stands up and says, my children are at risk. They're going to be killed. That's why I feel I now have to showcase myself and stand on a platform and make terribly serious comments.
It's interesting the point you make about Marlon Brando as well, because we're so often lectured to by people who have terrible home lives. And it is that, charity starts in the home. Get your life sorted. What is it? It's Jordan Peterson, isn't it? Make your bed.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and people just don't do
that. And I suppose that's part of what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that they have got their lives sorted out. They are more tolerant, more liberal. Their kids are happier, more, freer than your children. And so in a way, it's just another way of celebrities to pull one-upmanship. It's a look at us, we're better than you.
Yeah, yeah. And what about, David Tennant in particular, who is he? Because a lot of non-Brits might not know. And what's he said?
He's a great actor, TV actor, was one of the Doctor Who's, has said that his son is his daughter now, or is non-binary. One of his sons is non-binary, and part of. Nobody said anything about that, but he felt the need to then put himself forward and become the big spokesman for trans children across the world, and so he started wearing a series of T-shirts. One of them was something like, leave trans children alone, you freaks. And another one. And then, of course, he then went on, most recently at a LGBTQ awards ceremony, he was caught talking about feminists who were defending single-sex spaces and women's rights. He described them as moaning fuckers. And he's so dismissive, so contemptuous.
So anti-women, isn't it? And it's yet another person from the Harry Potter franchise. I suppose if you're in Britain, if you're looking at famous names in Britain, they've all been in the Harry Potter franchise. And you know what? A lot of people say they have a go at the Harry Potter kids for not standing by J.K. Rowling.
Was David Tennant in the...
Yeah, Barty Crouch.
Oh, right. I didn't know he was.
He was in one of the films. He had a funny his tongue was coming out a lot. Which is just a fact.
Great. Well,
we
should definitely listen to him then if his tongue was hanging out in one Harry Potter film.
Well, I'd say a lot of people do use that argument of like, oh, you wouldn't be anywhere without J.K. Rowling. And I don't agree with that because I think, well, okay, the writer of the film could have horrible views. It doesn't mean you've got to then have them. Yeah. However, I still don't think they're right. So he's come out
in the
and said
case, I don't know enough about it, but in the case of the kids in the Harry Potter films, they were, their names were made initially by it. And Daniel Radcliffe, I have a real beef with. And okay, he doesn't, as of yet, have a trans child that we know of. He's drumming his fingers, no doubt, waiting for the moment when he can launch a trans child. But he does a lot of work for the Trevor Project, in big LGBT charity that reputes to campaign against suicide in LGBTQ youth, except as far as I'm concerned, the way that it operates actually promotes suicide, because all its surveys, it's a real problem that the LGBTQ movement now talks about suicide almost all the time. When I was doing gay rights and the whole gay rights movement, you will look in vain for a mention of suicide for the first 30, 40 years of the gay rights movement. We never said, oh, if we don't get our rights, we're going to go and kill ourselves. People would say, hey, that's a really pathetic argument for a social justice movement. I mean, there's never been a social justice movement in history that said, if you don't give our rights, we're going to jump into the river and kill ourselves. I mean, it is an appalling stance. But what it also does, especially since it's about kids, it's encouraging all these kids who are entering the movement to think that suicide is actually an option. It is something that you get attention for. It's an appalling way to sort of campaign for rights. So Trevor Project does all this, and Daniel Radcliffe is a big spokesperson for them. And he did this appalling video where he sat around with a whole bunch of binary and non-binary and trans young people. Hey, I want to know from you, how can I help you, was the whole stance. But then they went round, and all of these kids who seemed troubled were all on hormones of various descriptions. And you think, well, the one thing that they would tell you not to do 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you have some mental problems as an adolescent, would be to take highly powerful hormones. And so you've got boys on estrogen, you've got girls on testosterone. Oh, surprise, surprise. They feel anxious, disturbed, and have, sort of real mental anxiety.
Does it speak of people like Daniel Radcliffe and David Tennant worrying about looking good rather than doing good?
I mean, the average person, if they were going to put their name to a petition, would do a Google to find out a bit more about it. The average person, if they were going to go to a public meeting and speak on behalf of a cause, would do some due diligence to find out about it. And yet these are celebrities with huge platforms that don't bother to do any research, that are unbelievably lazy about it, and yet want to pontificate to us.
Is it? I suppose in some respects, I think a lot of people have made this point, of course, that 10 years ago it was adopting a child from Africa. Now it's getting a
Well, a few people did. I mean, it wasn't that common. Well, and, Madonna got away with it, but there was a huge storm afterwards.
Angelina Jolie.
Oh, did she? All right. Okay.
I think I might be wrong about that.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure they adopted from different kinds of places. And now with the trans thing, I just wrote a few names down because the trans, it really is quite a low percentage of people who are trans. I mean, it's really small, but in the celebrity world, it's extraordinary. Charlize Theron's kids, Cher's kids, Cynthia Nixon, Sting. There was a huge...
Jamie Lee Curtis.
Jamie Lee Curtis, of course, David Tennant, of course. Just it's absurd. So, I mean, how can they not see that this is obviously then a social contagion of we're the better people because we're having this kind of fashionable thing going on?
Well, they know more about, I mean, it's like, Emma Thompson cares more about the planet than anybody else. That's why she flies on a private plane from one side of the planet to the other to tell us about it. I mean, it's such hypocrisy.